Okay folks, today what we're going to look at is we're going to look at batch processing. By the end of this lesson you should understand what batch processing is, and you should understand the difference between it and real-time processing. So what is batch processing? Batch processing is where jobs are collected together and processed together as a batch or as a group. A batch is what's known as a group. So whenever we're talking about batch processing, we're talking about processing these all together as one group. These can be done at a later time or a later date. Real time is where an immediate response is required. So if you can't wait 1 second, that would be real time processing. Again, we're going to look at them in more detail in a second or two, but today what we're going to understand is the difference between batch and real time, and we're going to understand how transaction processing systems work, and in particular master files and transaction files. So batch and real time. We're already looking at the time differences between them, but there are other differences. With batch processing, things are processed at a later time and date. As I said earlier, they're grouped in together, so whenever you're looking at your gas or your electric bills, these things wouldn't be processed immediately. They'd be processed monthly or yearly. Your gas meter readings, for example, they'll come around, they'll collect them, they'll collect everyone's, and then together they'll send out all the bills together. The same with your 11 plus test. Whenever you did the 11 plus test, you did it all together. All the other schools were gathered together. They were then processed all together. With real time, they're processed immediately. No seconds can be spared. So if you're looking at disaster systems such as nuclear reactors or missile control systems or autopilots, you cannot wait 1 second. 1 second could be the difference between a disaster and the system being okay. Also, whenever you're looking at booking systems, you don't want somebody else booking the same seat as you at the same time. So this is what's known as a real-time transaction processing system. Also the same with concert seats and so on and so forth. So we'll look at batch in more detail. The data is collected together and processed together. This can be done at night and without human intervention. That's very important to note. So this can be done whenever the processing doesn't need to be done immediately. There can be a long time delay, however. With real time, it's processed immediately. This stops any double booking of seats and possible disasters. The advantage of it is this: there's no time delay. It's always up to date. The disadvantage of it would be, because it's very high processing, it can be very expensive because it needs to be extremely fast and it needs a lot of processing power. Transaction processing. Transactions are bits of business, like paying a bill. So I prefer to think of transactions as like money, dealing with transactions. Transaction processing is dealing with bits of business. This can be either batch or real time. In a batch system, all the bills are collected together and they're processed together in a batch. And as we already said, gas or electric bills, they'll be all gathered together and processed together in a batch. There's no immediate response required. In a second or two, we're going to look at an electric transaction processing system. We're going to look at the processes that are involved there. In a real-time transaction system, this is where an immediate response is required to deal with the person's transaction or bit of business. An example would be a plane booking system. Whenever you book a seat, you don't want anybody else double booking that seat. You cannot wait weeks or else somebody else might book it. To try and stop that, it needs to be processed immediately in real time. In a real-time transaction system, they're always up to date and it stops double booking of seats, which is very important. We'll now move on to look at a batch transaction processing system in more detail. Before we look at batch transaction processing, we're going to need to know a few terms. The first term we're going to look at is what's known as a master file. Now, the master file is the main file that stores all the details about all the customers and all their transactions. It's quite a large file, as you can imagine, because it contains all the customer details. Transaction files are used to update it. Now, what a transaction file is this? A transaction file is the changes that need to be made to the master file. So if you imagine that 5 or 6 customers need to pay their bills, them 5 or 6 transactions need to update the main file, the master file. So the transaction file is the list of changes that need to be made to it. So if you imagine this customer here and they needed to pay their bill, if we needed to update their main file, we'd need to know some account details. So we'd need to know their account number. This would be what's known as the key field. It uniquely identifies a customer. So using the key field, it would uniquely identify the customer, and then you would use it to search the master file to update their details. If we move on, we'll look at a company. In an electricity company, they come around and read your meter reading. Okay, so this can be done electronically, or they can come around and fill in a little card. These meter readings are grouped together into what's known as a batch. They're then entered into the computer system. Whenever they're entered into the computer system, there may be some validation checks, there might be some verification checks. Think back to your year 11 stuff. Any errors are reported. Once it's all put into the transaction file, the valid data is used to create this transaction file, the list of changes that need to be made to the master file. Before you do that, you need to sort it into the same order as the master file. So what they do is they use the key field. Because the key field uniquely identifies the customer, you want them in the same order as the master file. If they're in the same order, it allows you to easily find it and update it, and it allows you to keep track of it a lot easier. Using the master file and the list of changes to be made to it, you can then get the new customer's bill, and you can get an updated master file. So using the master file and the transaction file together, which are both sorted together at the same, you can then create the new bill and create the new master file. So the details of the transaction files are used to update the master file. This is saved as the new master file. The customer will be sent their bill, and the new master file will be used to calculate the bill for the next month or for the next quarter. Again, we'll look at this in summary. The first thing that's going to occur is the meter is going to be read and stored in batches. These batches are then going to be processed. They're going to be stored in what's known as a transaction file, the list of changes to the master file. These will need to be sorted and stored in the same order as the master file. Because they're in the same order, it should allow easy updating of the master file. So the master file and the sorted transaction file equals the new master file and the bill, which is then sent to the customer and printed out. Thanks.